Arcanus Prime hung in the void like a jewel of glass and steel, its massive rings rotating slowly against the backdrop of distant stars. The space station had been constructed specifically for this moment, a neutral ground where species that had spent the last decade tearing each other apart could finally sit at the same table. Inside the grand atrium, beings from across the galaxy gathered in their finest ceremonial attire, their voices creating a symphony of languages both spoken and telepathic. The Peace Summit had been 3 years in the making. Diplomats had negotiated every detail, from the temperature of the rooms to the chemical composition of the air. Every species needed to feel comfortable, respected, and most importantly, safe. The war had cost trillions of lives and left entire solar systems as nothing more than debris fields. Now finally there was hope for something better. Captain Marcus Chen stood near the observation window, watching the stars beyond. He wore his dress uniform, the dark blue fabric crisp and clean, though it could not hide the way it hung slightly loose on his frame. War had a way of burning the weight off a man. His face was young, perhaps 32 years old, but the eyes that stared out at the cosmos belonged to someone much older. 3 parallel scars ran from his left temple down to his jaw, pale lines against his tanned skin. More scars marked his hands, his neck, disappearing beneath his collar and sleeves. Each one told a story he wished he could forget. Behind him, the other members of Earth's security detail stood in similar positions, quiet and watchful. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to ensure that those who did negotiate remained safe. It was simple work compared to what they had done during the war, but Marcus found no comfort in simplicity. The memories were still too fresh, too sharp. The atrium buzzed with activity. Delegates from the Keithian sovereignty mingled with representatives from the Thorian collective. The insectoid Vexari chittered amongst themselves while the aquatic Selnari floated in their specialized environmental suits. Everyone seemed eager to put the war behind them, to pretend that the bloodshed had never happened. Marcus envied them that ability. He could not forget, and he was not sure he wanted to. The doors at the far end of the atrium opened with a pneumatic hiss, and a new group entered. Marcus recognized them immediately as more Keithians. They were humanoid in basic structure, but taller than humans by half a meter on average, with skin that shimmered between blue and purple depending on the light. Their faces were angular, almost crystalline in structure, with eyes that held an inner luminescence. They moved with an unconscious grace that spoke of genetic engineering perfected over millennia. At the center of the group walked a young Kethian woman who could only be described as radiant. She wore robes of silver thread that seemed to flow like liquid metal, and her hair fell in waves of deep violet past her shoulders. Jewels adorned her neck and wrists, each one worth more than most humans would earn in a lifetime. Her expression was one of barely concealed boredom, as if the summit itself was beneath her attention. This was Lyra Kethis, and Marcus knew her by reputation alone. The daughter of Ambassador Drazen Kethis, she had been born into the highest levels of Keithian society. She had never wanted for anything, never known hunger or fear or loss. While the galaxy burned, she had remained safe in the crystalline palaces of Cathara Prime, insulated from the reality of war by wealth and privilege. Lyra's eyes swept across the atrium with disinterest. She had attended a dozen such functions, and they were all the same. Boring speeches about unity and cooperation, false smiles exchanged between species that would go back to competing and scheming the moment the summit ended. Her father had insisted she attend, claiming it was time she learned the art of diplomacy. Lyra thought it was a waste of time. Then her gaze fell upon the human delegation, and she stopped walking. Her attendants, not expecting the sudden halt, nearly collided with her. She stared at Marcus and his fellow soldiers with an expression that slowly shifted from curiosity to something approaching disdain. "What are those?" she asked, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet that surrounded her. The translator implants that all attendees wore converted her words into 100 languages simultaneously. One of her attendants, a younger Kethian male named Vorin, leaned close. "Humans, my lady, from the planet Earth." "Earth?" Lyra laughed, a sound like bells that somehow managed to be cruel. Several nearby delegates turned to look. That primitive world on the galactic rim? Why are they even here? Vorin shifted uncomfortably. "They fought in the war, my lady." "They fought?" Lyra interrupted, walking closer to the human group. Her voice grew louder, ensuring that everyone nearby could hear. "Look at them." They are so small, so fragile. No natural armor, no enhanced physiology, no integrated technology. They look like they would shatter if you simply pushed them. Some of her attendants giggled nervously. A few young delegates from other species stopped to watch, smiling at the unexpected entertainment. The older diplomats, those who had lived through the war, began to look uncomfortable. They remembered what humans had done. They remembered the cost. Marcus heard every word. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he did not move. He kept his eyes forward, his posture perfect, his breathing controlled. He had endured worse than words. The scars on his body were proof of that. Lyra circled the human soldiers like a predator examining prey. And look at their equipment. So primitive, so basic. Where are the energy shields? Where are the neural enhancers? Where is the technology that any civilized species would have? She reached out as if to touch Marcus's uniform, stopping just short. Are these supposed to be impressive? Little pieces of colored metal pinned to plain fabric. A crowd had gathered now, watching the scene unfold. Some looked embarrassed for the humans. Others seemed amused by Lyra's performance. No one stepped forward to stop it. "My lady," Voren whispered urgently. "Perhaps we should what?" Lyra spun on him. "Should we pretend that these primitives are our equals? Should we bow and scrape before a species that only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last century? My people have sailed between stars for 10,000 years. She turned back to Marcus, her face now close to his. She studied his scars with mock curiosity. "What happened to your face, human? Did you have an accident? Did you fall?" Her attendants laughed, though the sound was forced and uncomfortable. "These marks show weakness, not strength," Lyra continued. "A true warrior, a warrior from an advanced species, would have medical technology to prevent such disfigurement. Or perhaps you simply lack the intelligence to avoid injury in the first place." Marcus's hands clenched briefly into fists, then relaxed. He breathed slowly through his nose. In through the nose, out through the mouth. It was a technique they taught in basic training, a way to control anger and fear. He had used it 1,000 times in combat. He used it now. Behind him, one of the younger human soldiers, a private named Torres, started to step forward. Marcus's hand moved slightly, a tiny gesture that said everything without words. "Stand down. Not worth it." Torres stopped, trembling with suppressed rage but obedient. "They cannot even speak," Lyra announced to the growing crowd. "Look at them. They stand there like statues, saying nothing. Perhaps they are too stupid to understand our languages. Perhaps they are simply too frightened to respond." More beings had gathered now, drawn by the commotion. The human delegation was drawing attention for all the wrong reasons. Some of the older diplomats looked genuinely worried. They knew the truth. They had seen what humans could do when pushed too far. But the younger ones, those who had been sheltered from the fighting, those who knew war only as stories and historical records, they whispered and smiled amongst themselves. Lyra felt powerful. She was making everyone look at her, making them pay attention. This was better than another boring evening of diplomatic platitudes. This was entertaining. "Tell me, silent soldiers," she said dramatically, gesturing to include all the humans present. "Why are you even here? What could you possibly have contributed to the war effort? Did you carry supplies for real warriors? Did you repair equipment for more advanced species? Surely you did not actually fight. Look at you. You would break." The words hung in the air like poison. The crowd had grown quiet now, the earlier laughter dying away as people began to sense they were witnessing something more serious than simple mockery. The human soldiers stood like carved stone, enduring the insults with painful dignity that spoke of years of military discipline. Then the crowd began to part. A presence was approaching, powerful and commanding. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even those who had been smiling moments before suddenly looked nervous, their expressions shifting to something approaching fear. "Lyra!" The voice was not shouted, but it carried through the entire atrium like thunder rolling across mountains. Everyone turned toward the source. Ambassador Drazen Kethis stood at the entrance to the atrium. He was taller than his daughter, broader in the shoulders, and where her skin was smooth and unblemished, his bore the pale lines of old scars. He wore formal diplomatic robes, but beneath them was visible the edge of ceremonial armor, dark metal etched with names in flowing Kethian script. The names of the dead, Marcus realized. The names of those who had fallen. On Drazen's face was an expression of such fury that several nearby beings actually stepped backward. His luminescent eyes, normally a soft blue, now blazed with an almost white intensity. He walked forward, and the crowd parted before him like water before the prow of a ship. Each step was measured, controlled, purposeful. This was not a man who had simply lost his temper. This was something far more dangerous. Lyra felt her blood turn to ice. She had seen her father angry before, had witnessed his displeasure when she failed to meet his expectations, but she had never seen this. Never in public. Never directed at her with such absolute fury. "Father, she began. "Be silent." The words were soft, but they carried the weight of absolute authority. Drazen stopped a few feet from his daughter. Then slowly and deliberately, he turned to face Captain Marcus Chen. For a long moment, the ambassador simply looked at the human soldier. Marcus looked back, his expression calm and respectful, meeting the Keithian's gaze without flinching. There was recognition there, Marcus realized. They had never met formally, but Drazen knew him, knew exactly who he was. The ambassador turned back to his daughter. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but in the now silent atrium, everyone heard every word. "Do you know what humans call the Battle of Korath Nebula?" Lyra opened her mouth, then closed it. She shook her head, suddenly feeling like a child caught in a misdeed rather than the sophisticated woman she pretended to be. Drazen's expression grew colder. "Of course you do not. You were safe in the palace while the galaxy burned. You were comfortable while others bled and died for your continued existence." He paused, letting the words sink in. Around them, the crowd stood frozen, witnesses to something they sensed was important but did not yet understand. "It is time you learned what you have been too privileged and too blind to see," Drazen continued. He gestured toward Marcus. "This man, this human you have mocked so cruelly, saved my life." He let that statement hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "Saved your life. Saved your mother's life. Saved the lives of everyone on our homeworld." Drazen's voice dropped even lower, forcing everyone to strain to hear. "And you called him weak." The truth revealed. "Ikir." Princess Lyra felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. Her father's words echoed in her mind, each one a hammer blow against her pride. "Saved my life. Saved your life. Saved our entire world." It made no sense. How could these small, scarred humans have saved anyone, let alone her powerful father and an entire planet? She looked around desperately at her attendants, hoping for support, for someone to tell her this was a mistake or a joke. But they had all taken several steps back, their faces pale with shock and fear. Even Vorin, who was always eager to please her, would not meet her gaze. They knew something she did not, and their expressions told her it was terrible. Ambassador Drazen moved closer to his daughter. Despite being only slightly taller, he seemed to tower over her. The weight of his presence, of his authority and his anger, pressed down on everyone nearby like a physical force. "You asked why they are here," Drazen said, his voice still controlled but filled with barely restrained emotion. "You questioned what they contributed to the war. You mocked their scars and called them marks of weakness and stupidity." He paused, his luminescent eyes boring into his daughter. "I will tell you a story, Lyra. You will listen to every word, and you will remember it for the rest of your life." Lyra wanted to speak, to defend herself, to explain that she had not meant real harm. But the look in her father's eyes stopped her cold. This was not the disappointed parent she had faced before. This was something else entirely, something forged in fire and blood. Drazen turned to address not just his daughter but everyone in the atrium. Diplomats, soldiers, politicians, and servants all leaned in to hear. Many of them were young like Lyra, born after the worst of the fighting. They had heard stories of the war, yes, but stories were distant things easy to dismiss or romanticize. 4 years ago, Drazen began, our people faced extinction. The Zarok Dominion had broken through every defensive line we constructed. They had already consumed 23 worlds, turning billions of beings into biomaterial for their war machines. They were coming for Cathara Prime, our homeworld, and every simulation we ran showed the same result. We would fall within weeks. The atrium remained absolutely silent. Even those who had lived through the war seemed caught by the ambassador's words, pulled back into those dark memories they had tried so hard to forget. The Galactic Council met in emergency session, Drazen continued. We begged for help. We called on old alliances, promised future trade agreements, offered technology and resources. We pleaded with every major species in known space. He paused, his expression growing harder. Do you know what we received? Sympathy, concern, promises to remember our people fondly in the historical records. But no help, no ships, no soldiers, nothing. Lyra felt a chill run through her body. She had not known this. Her tutors had taught her about the great victory, about the glorious battle where Keithian forces had triumphed over the Xeroc threat. But no one had mentioned begging for help. No one had mentioned being abandoned. Most species were already evacuating their border worlds, Drazen said. The Keithians were not the first to face the Xeroc, only the latest. Others had fallen before us, and the galaxy had learned a terrible lesson. The Dominion could not be stopped, only avoided. So they ran. They saved themselves and left us to die. An old Thorian diplomat near the front, his carapace marked with battle scars, nodded slowly. He remembered. He had been there when the decision was made to abandon the Keithian sector. We prepared for our last stand, Drazen continued, his voice thick with memory. Every ship that could fly, every weapon we could gather, every soldier who could hold a rifle. We would die, yes, but we would die with honor. We would make the Xeroc pay dearly for our world. He paused, his eyes distant, seeing something the others could not. And then they came. Who came? Lyra asked before she could stop herself, her voice small and uncertain. Drazen turned back to his daughter. The humans. This species you called primitive. This people you called weak and stupid. They came. He walked slowly toward Marcus, who still stood at attention. The human captain's expression remained neutral, but his eyes showed something. Not pride, Marcus realized. Something closer to pain. I was in the command center when their message arrived, Drazen said. Just 5 words. We are coming to help. No negotiations. No demands for payment or promises of future rewards. No questions about whether they could win or what the cost would be. Just we are coming to help. Drazen stopped next to Marcus. He did not look at the human, but somehow his words seemed to encompass him, to honor him. 18 hours later, their fleet arrived. We watched them come out of hyperspace. 427 ships, not large by galactic standards, not impressive to look at with their simple designs and basic armor. Many of our commanders felt despair rather than hope. How could these primitive vessels make any difference against the biomechanical horrors of the Xeroc? The ambassador's voice grew harder, colder. Then the fighting began, and we understood. We understood what it truly meant to be human. Lyra found herself leaning forward despite her fear and shame, caught by her father's words. The Xeroc fought like they always fought. Drazen continued. Overwhelming numbers, regenerating hulls, weapons that adapted to any defense. They had destroyed species with technology far more advanced than humanity's. Their victory seemed certain. He paused. But the Xeroc had never fought humans before. They did not understand what drove them. They did not comprehend the concept of fighting not for conquest or survival, but for complete strangers halfway across the galaxy. Drazen's voice rose slightly. The humans did not try to outmatch the Xeroc's technology. They did not attempt to outthink their adaptive systems. Instead, they did something the Xeroc had never encountered. They accepted that they were going to die, and they made that death count. The ambassador gestured to Marcus. This man, then a lieutenant, commanded a strike team. Their mission was considered suicide. They were to board the Xeroc command ship, a vessel the size of a small moon, crawling with millions of biomechanical soldiers. They were to fight their way to the central processing core and destroy it, buying our fleet's time to evacuate civilians. Lyra's eyes widened. Even with her limited military knowledge, she understood what that meant. A boarding action against a Xeroc vessel was certain death. The things they created, the horrors they deployed inside their ships were the stuff of nightmares. Lieutenant Chen's team consisted of 140 soldiers, Drazen said softly. Volunteers, every one of them. They knew they would not come back. They knew no one would retrieve their bodies. They knew they would be consumed by the Xeroc, their biomass used to create more weapons to kill their fellow humans. He paused, letting that sink in. They boarded anyway. The atrium was completely silent now. Not a single being spoke or moved. Even the atmospheric system seemed quiet, as if the station itself was listening. The fighting inside that ship lasted 14 hours, Drazen continued. We could track their progress by the explosions, by the sections of the vessel that went dark. They fought through corridors filled with horrors I will not describe. They pushed forward when any rational being would have fled or surrendered. Drazen finally looked at Marcus, and there was something in his eyes that Lyra had never seen directed at anyone outside their family. Respect. Genuine. profound respect. By the time they reached the central core, 112 of Lieutenant Chen's team were dead. The remaining 28 were all wounded. Logic said they should have retreated, should have accepted that they had done enough. But humans do not think like that. The ambassador's voice grew softer. They set their charges. They prepared to destroy the core, and then they discovered something the Xerox had not wanted anyone to find. He paused for effect. Experimentation chambers. The Xerox had been capturing civilians from worlds they conquered, studying them, learning how to create better weapons. In those chambers were 214 beings. Cathians mostly, civilians who had been taken from border worlds months earlier. Drazen's voice shook slightly. I was one of them. Your mother was another. We had been captured during a diplomatic mission that went wrong. The Xerox had been studying us, Lyra gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She had been told her parents had been off-world during the invasion, but the details had always been vague. Now she understood why. Lieutenant Chen's mission was to destroy the core and die, Drazen said. That was the plan. That was what Command expected. But when he found us, when he saw what the Xerox had done, he made a decision that changed everything. The ambassador's voice grew stronger. He split his remaining team. Half would stay and hold the corridors, preventing Xerox reinforcements from reaching the core. The other half would evacuate the prisoners. Chen himself stayed with the group holding the line. Drazen turned to face the crowd. Do you understand what that meant? He gave up his escape. He condemned himself to death so that strangers could live. And his soldiers followed that order without hesitation. Lyra felt tears running down her face. Around the atrium, she saw similar expressions on the faces of others. The story was not over, but already they understood the magnitude of what they were hearing. The evacuation took 3 hours, Drazen said. 3 hours of continuous fighting. The humans who stayed behind died one by one, buying time with their lives. They called out positions over the comm system. They joked with each other even as they were being torn apart. They sang songs from their homeworld as they set explosives and prepared for their final stand. His voice grew soft again. When the last prisoner was clear, Lieutenant Chen activated the charges. The explosion destroyed the Xerox command ship's core, crippling their entire fleet. It gave our forces the opening they needed to counterattack successfully. Drazen looked at Marcus. 17 of the 28 humans who entered that ship survived long enough to be evacuated. 11 died in the explosion. Lieutenant Chen was pulled from the wreckage by one of his own soldiers, a woman who refused to leave until she found him. He was clinically dead for 4 minutes before their medics revived him. The ambassador reached up and gently touched the scars on Marcus's face. The human flinched slightly but did not pull away. These scars, Drazen said softly, are from Xerox bioacid. They do not heal properly because the acid contains compounds that prevent regeneration. Human medical technology cannot fully repair them. Every advanced species in this room has the technology to remove such scars, but humans wear them instead. He looked at his daughter. Do you know why? Lyra shook her head, unable to speak. Because they remember, Drazen said simply. Each scar is a memory of someone they saved, something they protected, a line they held. They wear them as reminders that their pain mattered, that their sacrifice achieved something. He stepped back, his voice rising to address everyone. The Battle of Korath Nebula turned because of humans. 214 civilians lived because of humans. Cathara Prime was saved because humans from a primitive world on the edge of nowhere decided that strangers were worth dying for. Drazen turned back to his daughter. And you mocked them. Redemption and understanding. Lyra stood frozen, her father's words echoing in her mind like a death knell. Around her, the atrium remained silent, but she could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. Judgment, disgust, disappointment. She had thought herself sophisticated and worldly, had believed her status gave her the right to speak as she pleased. Now she understood she had been nothing more than an ignorant child playing at being important. The tears continued to stream down her face, leaving trails that glowed faintly in the ambient light. Her hands trembled at her sides. She wanted to run, to disappear, to go back in time and stop herself from speaking those terrible words. But time moved only forward, and she would have to live with what she had done. Ambassador Drazen looked at his daughter with an expression that was somehow worse than anger. Disappointment. Deep, profound disappointment that cut deeper than any rage could have. You will apologize. he said quietly. Not because I command it, though I do. Not because protocol demands it, though it does. You will apologize because you must understand the magnitude of your ignorance and cruelty. He gestured to Marcus. You will bow before this man and every human in this delegation. You will acknowledge your error and beg their forgiveness, and then you will spend the rest of this summit learning what true strength means. Lyra nodded, unable to speak. Her throat felt tight, her chest constricted. She had never felt shame like this before. She took a shaky step toward Marcus, then another. The human captain watched her approach with an expression that revealed nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just calm observation. When she stood before him, Lyra realized how tall he actually was. Not as tall as a Kethian, but solid, powerful in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. This close, she could see the details of his scars, could count the medals on his chest, could see the weariness in his eyes that spoke of burdens carried far too long. Captain Chen, she began, her voice cracking. I have no excuse for what I said. I was cruel and ignorant. I judged you based on appearances and prejudice, never considering that. She paused, struggling to find words adequate to the moment. That you might be more than I could ever hope to be. She slowly, deliberately dropped to one knee before him. Around the atrium, gasps echoed. A Kethian of noble blood did not bow to anyone outside their own ruling family. It was unprecedented. I beg your forgiveness, Lyra said, her head lowered. Not just for myself, but for my entire species. You bled for us while I sat in comfort. You sacrificed for us while I knew nothing but privilege. I am ashamed. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he reached down and gently touched her shoulder. Stand up, he said quietly. His voice was rougher than she expected, weathered by years of shouting orders over battlefield noise. Lyra stood confused. In Kethian culture, such an apology required acceptance or rejection. Marcus had done neither. Your father told you what happened, Marcus said, but he didn't tell you why. He gestured around the atrium. Look at this place. Look at all these species, all these different forms of life gathered together in peace. That's what we fought for, not for glory or recognition or medals. Marcus touched his chest where his decorations hung. These aren't trophies. They're reminders of friends who didn't come home. Every piece of metal is a name, a face, a person I'll never see again. He looked directly at Lyra. Your father said we saved 214 people. That's true, but we lost 123 doing it. Was it worth it? The question hung in the air. Lyra realized he was actually asking, not rhetorically but genuinely. Yes, she said uncertainly. You saved so many lives, Marcus nodded slowly. That's the math we make in the military. 123 lives for 214. A net positive. We call it acceptable losses. He touched one of his scars. But every one of those 123 had families. Had dreams. Had futures that were erased because I asked them to walk into hell. Marcus's expression didn't change, but his voice grew softer. Your father said we're strong. Maybe. But strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about breaking and putting yourself back together and moving forward anyway. Every human in this delegation has broken. Every one of us has scars that don't show on our skin. Lyra found herself listening intently, her earlier shame transforming into something else. Understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of it. Humans don't have natural armor, Marcus continued. We don't have advanced genetics or integrated technology. What we have is each other. When everything else fails, when the situation is impossible, when logic says to run or surrender, humans have this stupid, stubborn refusal to abandon each other. He gestured to the other human soldiers. Torres over there pulled me from burning wreckage. I didn't ask him to. I ordered him to leave. He ignored me and dragged me out anyway. That's humanity. We don't leave people behind, even when it's smarter to do so. One of the other humans, a woman with sergeant stripes, stepped forward slightly. Permission to speak, sir? Marcus nodded. Ma'am, the sergeant said, addressing Lyra directly, the captain's being modest. He doesn't mention that he stayed behind an extra hour after everyone else evacuated, setting additional charges to ensure the Xerox core was completely destroyed. He doesn't mention that he personally carried 3 wounded civilians when our equipment failed. He doesn't mention that his leg was broken in 2 places and he still fought for another hour. She paused. Every scar he has, he earned protecting someone else. That's not weakness. That's the kind of strength most people never find. Lyra looked around at the other humans, seeing them with new eyes. Each one stood with the same quiet dignity as Marcus. Each one undoubtedly carried similar stories, similar scars, similar ghosts. "I want to understand," Lyra said suddenly. "I want to learn. Not just about humans, but about what real nobility means, what real strength is." Marcus studied her for a moment. "That's not something you learn from a book or a lecture. It's something you live." "Then teach me to live it," Lyra said. "Please. I have spent my entire life being told I was special because of who my parents are, because of what family I was born into. But you're special because of what you've done, what you've chosen to do." Ambassador Drazen, who had been watching silently, stepped forward. "Captain Chen, my daughter has much to learn. If you would permit it, I would like her to spend the remainder of this summit with your delegation. Let her see the galaxy through human eyes." Marcus looked uncertain. "Ambassador, we're not teachers. We're soldiers." "Sometimes soldiers are the best teachers," Drazen replied. "They understand the cost of things in a way diplomats and nobles never can." Marcus looked at his fellow soldiers. Torres shrugged. The sergeant nodded slowly. Others made small gestures of agreement. "All right," Marcus said finally, "but we're not going to coddle you. If you want to understand humans, you'll have to work for it." "I will," Lyra said immediately. "I'll do whatever is necessary." Over the following days of the summit, Lyra became a shadow to the human delegation. She watched how they moved through the station, how they interacted with others. She noticed that they were always polite, always respectful, but also watchful. They saw threats others missed, positioned themselves to protect civilians without those civilians ever realizing it. She learned that Marcus woke every morning at over 400 hours to exercise, pushing his scarred body through routines that looked painful. When she asked why, he simply said, "The people I protect deserve me at my best." She discovered that Torres sent most of his military pay back to his family on Earth, keeping only what he needed for basic expenses. When she asked why he didn't keep more for himself, he looked at her as if the question made no sense. "They need it more than I do." She found that the sergeant, whose name was Rodriguez, spent her free time recording messages to the families of fallen soldiers, telling them stories about their loved ones, ensuring they knew their sacrifices mattered. One evening, Lyra sat with Marcus overlooking the station's observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the transparent aluminum. "You asked if saving those people was worth it," Lyra said quietly. "Worth losing 123 of your soldiers." Marcus nodded, not looking at her. "I've been thinking about that," Lyra continued. "I don't think there's a right answer. The people who were saved would say yes. The families of those who died might say no. Both would be correct." "Smart," Marcus said simply. "But I think," Lyra said slowly, "that what matters is that you gave them the choice. You asked for volunteers. You didn't order them to their deaths. They chose to go, chose to fight, chose to sacrifice themselves for strangers. That choice is what makes it meaningful." Marcus looked at her, something like approval in his tired eyes. "You're learning." "I have a long way to go," Lyra said, "but I want to keep learning. When this summit is over, I want to visit Earth. I want to see where you come from, understand your culture better." "Why?" Marcus asked. "You're a Kethian noble. Your life is on Cathara Prime." "Because," Lyra said firmly, "nobility should mean something more than birth and privilege. It should mean service, sacrifice, the willingness to stand between danger and those who cannot protect themselves. You showed me that." She stood and, without prompting, bowed deeply to him. Not because her father ordered it, not because protocol demanded it, but because she genuinely wanted to show respect. "Thank you, Captain Chen, for saving my parents, for saving my world, and for teaching me what strength really means." Marcus stood and returned the bow, human military style. "You're welcome, and Lyra, you're going to make a fine leader someday, the kind your people need." The summit concluded 3 days later with the signing of the Arcanus Accords, a treaty that established lasting peace between the warring factions. But for those who had witnessed the confrontation in the atrium, the real accord had been signed in that moment when a proud young noble learned humility, and a scarred human soldier showed her that true strength comes not from never falling, but from rising every time you do. As the delegates prepared to return to their respective worlds, Lyra stood with her father at their departure gate. She wore simpler robes now, having abandoned the excessive jewels and finery. "You've changed," Drazen observed. "I needed to," Lyra replied. "I was a fool." You were young and ignorant, her father corrected. But you learned. That's what matters. Across the concourse, the human delegation was preparing for their own departure. Marcus saw Lyra looking and raised his hand in a simple wave. She waved back, a gesture of respect between equals. Father, Lyra said quietly, when we return home, I want to establish a memorial for the humans who died saving us. Their names should be remembered, honored alongside our own fallen. Drazen smiled, the first genuine smile Lyra had seen from him since the confrontation. I've already commissioned one. It will stand in the central square of the capital. Every human who died in our defense will be named. He put his hand on his daughter's shoulder. And you will speak at its dedication. You will tell our people what you learned. That nobility must be earned, not inherited. That strength is measured in what we endure for others, not what we can do to them. Lyra nodded, her eyes still on the departing humans. I will make you proud, Father. I will make them proud. As their ship lifted from the docking bay and headed toward home, Lyra looked out at the stars and thought about the scars she could not see, the sacrifices made by people she had never known, and the human soldier who had taught her the most important lesson of her life. Some things were worth fighting for. Some things were worth dying for, and the greatest nobility was found in those who stood between darkness and light, bearing the cost so others would not have to. She would remember. She would honor them, and she would try every day to be worthy of what they had given.